We are hurtling towards the end of the year and another month has gone by. This is my October wrap up, and most of it is going to be what I read for Occult Detective October, which was a readathon that I took part in and was a co host. And this was created by MJ of Reading This Life. There was a ton of other co hosts that did this. It was a super fun time. I read a lot of books in a genre that I probably wouldn't have read otherwise. First, we're going to get into the Occult Detective books, which is about 90% of what I read, and then I had a couple other ones that weren't in that genre that I wanted to fit in for that. And the first thing I read for this was Moonchild by Aleister Crowley. This book was freaking weird, and it didn't seem at times always tethered to reality. So the whole concept of the book is there is these two warring factions of magicians of white magic and magicians of black magic, and there's the White Lodge and the Black Lodge. The White Lodge magicians, there's this guy that he has decided he wants to try this grand experiment, and they want to create Moonchild. And what is a Moonchild? So it's when you call to a soul, but a great soul, one that could possibly change the world. So they have to find someone who's willing to have this baby, and they find someone who is, and they want her to like meditate on the moon and eat certain foods and do all this stuff so that she can call a specific kind of soul to her. And they do rituals and there's magic involved, and it's super weird and heavily occult based, but the story didn't always like flow together. The whole time the Black Lodge is trying to capture this woman. At some point they do, and the guy who was running this experiment was like, well, I knew it was gonna fail, so whatever. And they don't care. Like, what? This whole time they spent all this time, and then she leaves and gets captured, and they're like, whatever, fine, no one cares. So that was weird. It was interesting. You do have like any kind of interest in like occult and some of the aspects of it. This was a fictional tale, but it ties in like stuff from actual occult practice. And I don't know if when he wrote this one, if this was in the period of his life when he had gotten addicted to heroin or not, because he had problems with that drug and amongst other things. So maybe that's why it wasn't so tethered to reality, and like the story would just like, he'd be here and then it would just like float away and then something else would happen, and it was okay. It was something that of interest to me to read. So next after that, I got into the Warlock Holmes series. It's basically a paranormal Sherlock Holmes. He does X-Files investigations, but he is warlock and magical, and also Warlock Holmes has the might of 1,000 demons. So he has all these demons at his beck and call. He also has the spirit of this guy, Moriarty, that he had absorbed, trapped inside him, and every once in a while he like freaks out and blurbs out words, and it's Moriarty speaking through him. And as you get deeper into the series, I read books 1 through 3. The first one's The Study in Brimstone. The second one is The Hounds of Baskerville. The third one is My Grave Ritual. And as you get deeper into it, you find out why Holmes has all these demons at his beck and call, and you get into his backstory. And then there's John Watson in the first book. You find how they meet and how they start working together, and all of Holmes's eccentricities and weirdness and all of that. And there's like 4 or 5 stories in each one of these weird mystery capers that are all like magical and paranormal, and there's these weird creatures, and it is a fun time. And I liked it so much that I got the next 2 books in the series. If you like paranormal stuff and mysteries and stuff that's just outright goofy and wacky and zany, Warlock Holmes is super fun. After that, I read A Life with Ghosts by Steve Gonsalves, and he is a real-life paranormal investigator, so I would call that an occult detective. So I was like, this counts. It's not fiction, and it counts. And so it goes into his backstory of, he's one of the original people on the show Ghost Hunters, with him and Dave Tango and Jason Hawes and Grant Wilson. He just goes into like how he got into ghost hunting back in the day, having a fascination with like ghost movies growing up, and then finding out, some of these are based on a true story, and then him meeting Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were a famous paranormal investigator couple, him getting to work with them, and then eventually getting onto the Ghost Hunters TV show. And then he goes into like all the places he's investigated and tells you his experience and like the history of the place and some of the stories and legend. And it's really interesting, and I had a really great time reading it. You get to know more about him and like kind of all the different jobs he had before that. Like he was a police officer, he worked in the jewelry industry, setting diamonds and making jewelry. He also was a drummer in a band and like all this other stuff that I never knew. And I thought it was pretty cool. If you like paranormal stuff, it was a great book to read. It was quite fascinating. After that, I read The X-Files Archives Volume 3, and there's 2 stories in it. One was called Goblins and the other was called Ground Zero. And the Goblins one is about this killer who seems to be like invisible. They're witnesses to the crime, but all they see is like shadow coming out of an alley or something coming out of a tree and attacking people mysteriously and disappearing. And so there's that one. And then the other one, Ground Zero, is about this nuclear scientist who worked originally on the Manhattan Project, and he's working for this new research facility for another nuclear-based project, mysteriously dies in his office, and it looks like a small concentrated nuclear blast killed him. Mulder and Scully of the X-Files have to figure out what the heck happened, because it happens again to some other guy who also had a connection to the Manhattan Project. It is a wild book, and I love reading those. I read the first one. I haven't read the second one, and I skipped over and got the third, and that was because the second book cost way more than the third one, so I went with a cheaper option. But anyway, each story is one of the episodes, and so it's nice to revisit. It feels like revisiting old friends. I love the X-Files, so eventually I'd like to get all of them. More books, right? More. After that, I read The Sea Priestess by Dion Fortune. This book follows a real estate agent meets this lady. Before he meets her, he has this dream about meeting her, but she's this sea priestess who arrives on a boat coming from overseas, and he has all these weird visions and such. The reason I think he has these visions is well, they say it's asthma, but it sounds like what he has is like panic attacks and asthma. And so they give him morphia, which I believe is morphine. And so he'll have these like very vivid dreams and visions, and he sees stuff like revolving around reincarnation. When they meet, they start talking about all kinds of strange things, and then she's looking for a place that is by the sea. She wants to do some sort of magical rituals that have to do with the moon and the sea, and him and her enter into a strange kind of relationship, and they find a place finally and do these rituals, and they talk about the stuff with the reincarnation. There's a lot of occult elements based and woven through it, and it was really great. The story was good. I like the characters a lot, and it just flowed really well. And I hadn't read anything by Dion Fortune before. I would like to read more of her stuff. So those were all the things I read for Occult Detective October, which was awesome. And so now I have a few other ones I read that were not Occult Detective based. The next one I read was Whale Fall by Daniel Kraus. It was so much more than I ever imagined it would be. There's this kid and his father passes away, and him and his dad had a big falling out. He decides he's gonna go try to find his dad's body. Like, his dad was this big legendary diver, and but at home, you know, he wasn't the greatest guy. He drank a lot and he treated his son like garbage and all of that. But he did teach his son all about scuba diving growing up and all this knowledge of the ocean and whatnot. And so after his dad dies, you know, he starts to feel bad that, you know, they buried an empty casket, and mom and his sisters kind of, you know, he feels like they're disappointed in him. So he goes and he's going to try to find the bones of his father. What ends up happening? Getting swallowed by a whale. He has to survive, or he might die. I don't know. Well, I do know. While he's in there, he starts to hallucinate or hear a voice, possibly, of his father. He doesn't know if he believes it's his dad or not, but working through some of the things in his life and learning to let go and forgiveness, and, you know, maybe they end up being able to say some of the stuff that they couldn't say in life to each other. And it was really moving and emotional, and so much more than I ever possibly thought it would be. It's a horror book, but also, you know, it's so much more. It was really great. After that, I read Shers Cord by Scott Leeds. This is a book about a mythical or legendary chord called Shers Cord that, when played, supposedly opens the veil between the living and the dead. That couldn't possibly work, could it? Maybe, because then the book would not be so long. That's for sure. Oh, it's so good. This is another guy and his father falling out story as well. There's this guy, Charlie, and he works in A&R and works in the music industry, and you know, finds musical talent, signs bands, and his dad owned a record store. His dad passes away, and him and his dad had a big falling out. So comes back home, he finds out he inherited the record store, but he's like, F this, I don't want it, I'm gonna sell it. And the lawyer's like, well, hold on, you know, you gotta think about the people who have worked there for years of their lives, what are they gonna do? And so he kind of convinces them to like hold off, think about it for a few days and whatnot. And then the lawyer also gives him this like case, and he's like, here, and also your father wanted you to have this. Like, what is this? And it has a note from his dad that says, I told you they were real. What? So he opens it, and there are these 4 records, and it says Shers Cord, and he's like, what the fuck? Are you serious? Because his dad had told him and his sisters about this for years growing up. And so his dad may have kind of gained an obsession with finding these. Apparently he did, and maybe that had something to do with his death. And maybe because the records didn't get played, there would be no book. Maybe some people end up playing it, and there's dire consequences, and it's great. If you like horror that has heavily music entrenched themes in it, Shers Cord. And then I read Frostbite by Angela Sylvain. Oh man, that book is wild, and the 90s nostalgia in it is for real. It's awesome. Like, there is all these different parts in the book, and then like different songs are mentioned. She lists in the back, there's like a whole track listing of them in the back, which I thought was really cool. So this story is about these alien parasitic worms that land, and then they body snatch a bunch of prairie dogs, and the prairie dogs go crazy and start attacking everybody. And then, you know, there's this crazy religious cult that says it's the end of the world and the apocalypse is coming, and it is up to Raylene and her friend Nate to save Demise North Dakota. Otherwise, I don't even know. It is a wild story, and it was so much fun. It was never scary. It was fun. It was fun horror. Is that a thing? I guess it could be scary to people that don't really like horror. But since I like horror, it was fun. I had a lot of fun with it. And the cover's super gorgeous. I mean, look at it. So good. Highly recommend it. Yeah, if you have any interest in that book, I will have a link to it down below. And if you use my affiliate code SimplySin10, you get another 10% off on that book. So, just saying. Also, if you are a fan of videos where I talk about multiple things that I've read or am reading, next video coming up will be about that, so stick around, check it out. And if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.